Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that'll make you think twice about touching anything suspicious. We're talking about Grey Death, a street drug so deadly, so terrifying, that even touching it can kill you. Not the Johnny Depp pirate kind of death. Not the romantic medieval plague kind. I mean accidental, instant, horrifying death from a substance that looks like concrete mix and acts like a poison from a nightmare you can't wake up from. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. A huge thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You know who you are, and your curiosity shapes what we explore here. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. Also, the channel is now live on Spotify. Check it out via the link in the description. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe, just maybe, don't touch anything weird lying on the street. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how a drug gets so powerful that emergency responders need hazmat suits just to be near it? What makes something so toxic that your skin becomes a highway to death? How did we go from marijuana and cocaine to synthetic nightmares engineered in basement labs? Could you identify Grey Death if you saw it? Would you survive if you accidentally touched it? And would paramedics even make it in time to save you with Narcan before your brain shuts down? And now, congratulations. You've just stumbled into the world of synthetic opioids. The year is 2017. Fentanyl isn't enough anymore. Neither is carfentanil. Someone, somewhere, decided to mix them all together with a few other nightmare chemicals. You have no idea what you're about to touch, and your life expectancy just dropped to minutes. Good luck. Let's start with how we got here, because Grey Death didn't just appear out of nowhere like some cursed artifact in a horror movie. It's the end result of decades of drug evolution, or more accurately, drug devolution. Once upon a time, street drugs were relatively simple. Heroin from poppies, cocaine from coca leaves, marijuana from, well, marijuana. But then chemists, and I use that term loosely, figured out they could synthesize opioids in labs, making them cheaper, stronger, and infinitely more deadly. The shift began in earnest in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Pharmaceutical companies were pumping out prescription opioids like OxyContin, telling doctors they were safe, non-addictive, and perfect for managing pain. Spoiler alert, they were lying. Millions of Americans got hooked on pills, and when doctors finally started cutting people off, or when prescriptions became too expensive, those people didn't just stop needing opioids, they turned to the streets. And street dealers, always entrepreneurial in the worst possible way, realized there was a massive market just waiting to be exploited. But here's where it gets twisted. Heroin, the traditional street opioid, comes from poppy plants. You need fields, farmers, processing labs, smuggling routes. It's labor-intensive and risky. Synthetic opioids? You can make those in a basement with chemicals ordered off the internet. No fields, no sunlight, just beakers, Bunsen burners, and a complete disregard for human life. It's like comparing artisanal bread to something microwaved in 30 seconds that also happens to kill you. Fentanyl was the first synthetic to really break through. It was 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, which meant dealers could cut their heroin with just a tiny bit of fentanyl and stretch their supply. More product, more profit, more overdoses. Then someone had the brilliant idea to skip the heroin altogether and just sell straight fentanyl. Then someone else thought, why stop there? And created carfentanil, fentanyl's psychotic older brother, used to tranquilize elephants. Yes, elephants. Animals that weigh thousands of pounds. And people started putting that in drugs meant for humans who weighed generously 200 pounds. And thus, Grey Death was born. Not in a lab with safety protocols and ethical oversight, but in somebody's garage, mixed together like a demented science project. It's the endgame of the opioid crisis, a drug so strong that even the people making it don't fully understand what's in it. Every batch is different. Every dose is a gamble. It's Russian roulette, but every chamber is loaded. The only question is how fast the bullet hits. So, no, Grey Death didn't just appear. It's the horrifying logical conclusion of decades of pharmaceutical greed, failed drug policy, and underground chemists treating human lives like lab rats. And the scariest part, it's probably not even the final form. Somewhere, right now, someone is cooking up something even worse. Grey Death isn't a single drug. It's a cocktail, a horrifying mixture of some of the most dangerous synthetic opioids ever created. Picture this: a greyish, cement-like powder or chunky substance that looks like dirty gravel someone swept up from a construction site. It's not branded, it's not regulated, and it's not consistent. One batch might contain fentanyl, U47700, a synthetic opioid nicknamed Pink or U4, carfentanil, an elephant tranquilizer, yes, for actual elephants, and heroin. The next batch? Who knows? That's the terrifying thing about Grey Death. There's no recipe, no standardization. It's whatever the person mixing it decided to throw together that day, based on what chemicals they could source, how much money they wanted to make, and how little they cared about the people who'd eventually use it. Sometimes it's fentanyl heavy. Sometimes it's laced with U47700. Sometimes there's heroin in there for texture. Sometimes there's not. You literally have no idea what you're getting, and by the time you find out, you're already overdosing. The name Grey Death reportedly came from its appearance. It looks like concrete mix or the crud you'd scrape off an old sidewalk. Not exactly appetizing. But the name also fits because of what it does. It kills you. Quickly. Quietly. Efficiently. Users started calling it Grey Death as a warning, the way sailors used to mark dangerous waters on maps with skulls. Here be monsters. Here be death. Don't touch this unless you have a death wish, and even then, maybe reconsider. Law enforcement and medical examiners identified Grey Death by testing overdose victims and drug seizures. What they found was a nightmare cocktail. In some samples from Georgia and Alabama, where Grey Death first made headlines around 2017, they found fentanyl, carfentanil, heroin, and U47700 all mixed together. It's like someone opened a cabinet of the world's deadliest opioids and said, let's just use all of them. Imagine ordering a drink and getting gasoline, antifreeze, and cyanide mixed with a splash of rum. That's Grey Death. And here's the kicker. It's cheap because it's synthetic, because it doesn't require poppy fields or international smuggling operations. It's absurdly cheap to produce. That means it's profitable for dealers and affordable for users desperate for a fix. But affordability means nothing when the product kills you on the first try. It's the bargain bin of death. Congratulations, you saved $5. Now you're dead. There's no quality control, no customer service, no refunds. Just a grey chunk of powder that might contain 10 different things or 3. Might kill you instantly or take a few minutes, and definitely won't come with an ingredient list. You're not buying a drug. You're buying a mystery box of death, and the house always wins. Let's talk about carfentanil for a second, because it's one of the key ingredients often found in Grey Death, and it's absolutely bonkers. Carfentanil is a synthetic opioid used by veterinarians to sedate large animals. Think elephants, rhinoceroses, and other creatures that weigh several tons. It's roughly 10,000 times more potent than morphine, and 100 times stronger than fentanyl. A dose the size of a few grains of salt can kill a grown adult. Yes, you read that correctly. Grains of salt. Not a line of powder. Not a pill. Grains. The amount that would fit on the tip of a pencil eraser is enough to stop your breathing permanently. And people are putting this in street drugs on purpose. Let that sink in for a moment. Somewhere, someone thought, you know what would be great for humans? Elephant tranquilizer. And then they went ahead and did it. Carfentanil was developed in the 1970s by a pharmaceutical company as a large animal tranquilizer. It was never intended for human use, not for medicine, not for surgery, not for anything. Even trained veterinarians handle it with extreme caution, wearing gloves and masks because accidental exposure can be fatal. If a vet is sedating a rhinoceros and gets a tiny bit of carfentanil on their skin, they can overdose. That's how potent this stuff is. It doesn't care that you're a trained professional. It doesn't care that you're careful. It just kills. So how did it end up in street drugs? Simple. It's cheap and unbelievably strong. A dealer can buy a small amount of carfentanil for next to nothing, cut it into a huge batch of heroin or fentanyl, and suddenly their product is stronger. Of course, stronger in this case means lethal, but dealers aren't pharmacists. They're not calculating safe dosages. They're eyeballing measurements in dim lighting with no protective equipment, mixing death into baggies, and handing it off to users who have no idea they're about to inject something designed to drop a 5-ton animal. When carfentanil enters your bloodstream, your body doesn't stand a chance. It floods your opioid receptors, the parts of your brain that regulate pain and breathing, and shuts them down. Your lungs stop working, your heart rate plummets, your brain, starved of oxygen, begins to die, and this all happens in seconds, not minutes, seconds. You don't have time to call for help. You don't have time to realize you're overdosing. One moment you're high, the next moment you're unconscious, and a few moments after that you're dead. Emergency responders hate carfentanil because it requires massive doses of Narcan to reverse. 1 dose won't do it. 2 won't do it. Sometimes it takes 4, 5, 6 doses to bring someone back, and even then, it's not guaranteed. Carfentanil is so powerful that even after Narcan kicks in, the carfentanil can outlast it, sending the person back into overdose once the Narcan wears off. It's like playing whack-a-mole with death. The truly insane part: carfentanil is legal in some countries. It's manufactured in bulk in places like China and shipped internationally, often mislabeled as something harmless. By the time it reaches the streets, it's been cut, mixed, and packaged into grey death, ready to kill people who are just trying to get high and escape their problems for a few hours. Instead, they escape permanently. Before grey death, there was fentanyl, and fentanyl alone was already a catastrophe. Originally designed as a legitimate painkiller for cancer patients and surgical procedures, fentanyl is about 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. It's powerful, fast-acting, and when used correctly in a hospital, it's a lifesaver. But on the street, it's a death sentence wrapped in powder. Fentanyl was first synthesized in 1960 by a Belgian chemist named Paul Janssen. It was a marvel of modern medicine, a painkiller so effective that patients could undergo surgery with minimal suffering. Hospitals loved it. Doctors loved it. It was administered through patches, injections, and lozenges, always under strict medical supervision with precise dosing. In that controlled environment, fentanyl was safe. Outside of it, absolute chaos. The problem started when pharmaceutical companies began overprescribing opioids in the 1990s and 2000s. Millions of Americans got hooked on pills like OxyContin and Vicodin. When doctors started cutting patients off, or when pills became too expensive or hard to get, people turned to heroin. And when heroin wasn't strong enough anymore, fentanyl entered the picture. Drug dealers realized they could cut their heroin with fentanyl, making it more potent while using less product. More profit, less work. Economics 101 applied to human misery. But here's where it gets dark. Fentanyl is so strong that even experienced drug users, People who'd been using heroin for years started overdosing. A dose of heroin that would normally get you high could kill you if it was cut with fentanyl, and users had no way of knowing. It's not like dealers were labeling their products. Warning: contains fentanyl, may cause death. There were no ingredient lists, no dosage instructions, no safety warnings, just powder in a baggie and a prayer that you'd wake up the next morning. By the mid-2010s, fentanyl overdoses were skyrocketing. The CDC reported that synthetic opioid deaths, primarily driven by fentanyl, increased by over 500% between 2013 and 2016. 500%. That's not a statistic. That's a plague. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. Morgues were overflowing. Families were burying loved ones who died with no warning, no goodbye, just gone. And then it got worse. Because fentanyl wasn't killing people fast enough, apparently. Someone decided to make it stronger. They created fentanyl analogues, chemical cousins of fentanyl with slightly different molecular structures, but the same deadly effects. Acetylfentanyl, furanyl fentanyl, carfentanil. Each one more potent than the last. It was an arms race, except instead of nuclear weapons, it was synthetic opioids, and the casualties were piling up in cities across America. Fentanyl doesn't just kill you, it kills you fast. Most overdose victims don't have time to call 911. They don't have time to realise something's wrong. They inject, they snort, they smoke, and within seconds their breathing slows and stops. Friends find them collapsed on bathroom floors, in cars, in park benches, already blue, already cold. Narcan can save them, but only if someone finds them in time. And with fentanyl, in time means minutes, sometimes less. So, yeah, fentanyl was the gateway to hell. And grey death, that's what's waiting on the other side. U47700, affectionately nicknamed Pink or U4 by people who clearly have a dark sense of humour, is another synthetic opioid that found its way into the grey death cocktail. Developed in the 1970s by a pharmaceutical company called Upjohn, it was never approved for medical use, probably because even in controlled settings, it was clear this stuff was dangerous. But that didn't stop underground chemists from cooking it up and selling it on the streets. U47700 is roughly 7 to 8 times more potent than morphine, which makes it weaker than fentanyl but still plenty strong enough to kill you. It was originally developed as a potential painkiller, part of the endless pharmaceutical quest to create the perfect opioid, something that relieved pain without causing addiction or side effects. Spoiler alert, they failed. Every opioid is addictive, every opioid has side effects, and U47700 was no exception. It was shelved, forgotten, and left to gather dust in research papers for decades. Then the internet happened. Specifically, the dark web happened. In the early 2010s, online drug markets exploded. You could buy anything: heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, and increasingly research chemicals, synthetic drugs that existed in a legal grey area because they were technically not for human consumption. U47700 was one of them. Chinese chemical suppliers started manufacturing it in bulk and shipping it worldwide, often labelled as a research chemical or not for human use to skirt international drug laws. Users started experimenting with U47700 because it was legal-ish, cheap, and got you high. What they didn't know was that it was also unpredictable and deadly. Unlike prescription opioids with standardized dosing, U47700 came as a white or pinkish powder, with no instructions, no purity guarantees, and no safety net. People treated it like heroin, eyeballing doses, and promptly overdosing because they underestimated how strong it was. Emergency rooms started seeing cases, medical examiners started finding it in toxicology reports, and by 2016, The DEA classified it as a Schedule 1 controlled substance. Too late. The damage was done. By the time U-47700 was banned in the US, it had already infiltrated the street drug supply. Dealers were mixing it into heroin, fentanyl, and eventually Grey Death. Why? Because it was cheap and it worked. It got people high, and that's all that mattered. Never mind that it also caused severe side effects: nausea, vomiting, respiratory depression, seizures, and death. Minor details, really. One of the scariest things about U-47700 is that it's caustic, meaning it can burn and damage tissue. Users who injected it reported severe pain, abscesses, and tissue necrosis at injection sites. Snorting it burned nasal passages. It was like injecting acid that also happened to get you high and might kill you. And yet people kept using it because addiction doesn't care about burns or abscesses or logic. Addiction cares about one thing: the next fix. When U-47700 showed up in grey, death mixtures, it added another layer of unpredictability. Now you had fentanyl, carfentanil, heroin, and U-47700 all mixed together in unknown ratios. It was like playing chemical roulette with your life. Every dose was a mystery, every use was a gamble, and the house always wins. So yeah, U-47700 might sound like a droid from Star Wars, but it's actually Pink Death's ugly cousin. And in the Grey Death family tree, that makes it one of the most dangerous relatives at the reunion. Grey Death first made headlines around 2017, popping up in southern states like Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio. It wasn't marketed with flashy branding or clever street names. It just appeared like a plague, and people started dying. Fast. The drug spread through word of mouth, through desperate dealers trying to maximize profits, and through users chasing stronger and stronger highs, because regular heroin just wasn't cutting it anymore. The first documented cases came out of Georgia, where the Georgia Bureau of Investigation started noticing a weird grey substance showing up in overdose deaths and drug seizures. At first, they thought it was just badly cut heroin, maybe mixed with concrete dust or some other filler. But when they tested it, they found a nightmare. Fentanyl, carfentanil, heroin, and U-47700 all mixed together. It was like someone had gone to the opioid buffet and said, "I'll take everything." Forensic scientists were baffled. Who would mix all of these together, and why? The answer, as always, came down to money. Synthetic opioids are cheap to produce. You don't need poppy fields in Afghanistan or smuggling routes through Mexico. You just need chemicals from China, a basement lab, and zero regard for human life. By mixing multiple synthetic opioids together, dealers could create a product that was insanely potent, incredibly cheap, and highly profitable. The fact that it was also incredibly deadly? That was just an unfortunate side effect. Or maybe it wasn't even unfortunate from their perspective. Because here's the twisted logic of the drug trade. When people start dying from your product, other users think, "Wow, that must be really strong," and they want to try it. Death becomes marketing. Grey Death spread quickly because the opioid epidemic had already primed the market. By 2017, millions of Americans were addicted to opioids. They'd started with prescription pills, moved to heroin when the pills ran out, and now their tolerance was so high that regular heroin barely touched their cravings. They needed something stronger. Grey Death was the answer to a question no one should have been asking. Word spread through the usual channels: street dealers, friends, online forums. "Hey, there's this new stuff. It's grey. It's strong. Be careful." But be careful doesn't mean much when you're deep in addiction, when your body is screaming for opioids, when you're willing to risk everything just to feel okay for a few hours. So people tried it, and some of them died. and more people heard about it and tried it anyway. It was a cycle of death feeding more death. Law enforcement tried to keep up, but they were fighting a losing battle. Every time they shut down one supplier, two more popped up. Every time they seized a batch of grey death, another shipment arrived from overseas. It was like playing whack-a-mole with a hydra. Cut off one head, three more grow back. And meanwhile, bodies kept piling up in morgues, tagged with suspected opioid overdose, waiting for toxicology reports that would confirm what everyone already knew. Grey Death had claimed another victim. The media started covering it, which only made it worse. News stories about the deadliest drug on the streets acted as free advertising. Users who thought they'd built up a tolerance wanted to test themselves against it. Young people looking for a thrill saw it as a challenge, and desperate addicts just saw it as another option in a landscape where all the options were bad. Grey Death wasn't a street sensation because it was cool or trendy. It was a street sensation because it was everywhere, it was cheap, and it was exactly what the opioid epidemic had been building toward. The logical endpoint of stronger and stronger drugs chasing higher and higher tolerances, and nobody knew how to stop it. Here's where Grey Death gets truly terrifying. You don't even have to use it to die from it. Just touching it can be fatal. Yes, you read that correctly. Touching it can kill you. The synthetic opioids in Grey Death, particularly carfentanil and fentanyl, are so potent they can be absorbed through your skin. That means if you're a police officer searching a suspect and you brush against some Grey Death residue, congratulations, you just poisoned yourself. This isn't theoretical. It's happened. Multiple times. Police officers, first responders, and even bystanders have overdosed just from skin contact with fentanyl and its analogues. In 2017, an Ohio police officer named Chris Green collapsed after accidentally touching fentanyl during a traffic stop. He wasn't using drugs. He wasn't even near anyone who was actively using. He just brushed against some powder on a suspect's clothing, and within minutes his body started shutting down. His colleagues had to hit him with multiple doses of Narcan to bring him back. He survived, but the incident became a wake-up call. This stuff doesn't play by the rules. The science behind skin absorption is straightforward and horrifying. Your skin is a barrier, but it's not perfect. Certain chemicals, especially those with small molecular structures and lipophilic properties, meaning they dissolve in fats, can penetrate your skin and enter your bloodstream. Fentanyl and carfentanil fit that description perfectly. They're designed to cross biological barriers quickly, which is why fentanyl patches work so well in hospitals. You slap a patch on someone's skin and the drug seeps through, providing pain relief for hours. Great in a controlled medical setting, nightmare fuel on the streets. But here's where it gets even worse. The amount needed to kill you through skin absorption is terrifyingly small. We're talking milligrams, maybe even less. A barely visible dusting of powder on your hand could be enough, and you might not even notice it. You're patting someone down during an arrest, you're cleaning up after a bust, you're examining evidence, and boom, you've just absorbed a lethal dose. Your breathing slows, your vision blurs, your legs buckle, and if you're alone, if no one sees you collapse, if there's no Narcan nearby, you're dead. This risk has fundamentally changed how law enforcement and first responders do their jobs. In the past, finding drugs on someone was routine. Now, every interaction is potentially life-threatening. Officers wear gloves, sometimes multiple pairs. They avoid touching surfaces. They treat drug scenes like hazmat situations, which, frankly, they are. Some departments have issued full hazmat suits for officers responding to overdose calls or executing drug warrants. It's not paranoia, it's survival, and it's not just law enforcement at risk. What about civilians? What about kids playing in a park where someone dropped a baggie? What about janitors cleaning a public bathroom where someone overdosed? What about anyone who might accidentally come into contact with this stuff without knowing what it is? Grey death doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with warning labels. It just sits there, looking like dirt or concrete dust, waiting for someone to touch it. The cruel irony is that the very thing that makes fentanyl useful in medicine, its ability to work quickly through skin contact, is what makes it so dangerous on the streets. It's like giving a toddler a loaded gun. The mechanism is effective, but the context is catastrophic. And until we figure out how to get this stuff off the streets, every surface is suspect, every powder is potentially deadly, and every touch could be your last. Narcan, also known as naloxone, is an opioid antagonist, meaning it can reverse an opioid overdose by blocking the drug's effects on the brain. It's been called a miracle drug, and in many cases it is. EMTs, police officers, and even bystanders trained in its use have saved countless lives by administering Narcan to overdose victims. But Grey Death laughs at one dose of Narcan. Here's how Narcan works. When someone overdoses on opioids, those drugs flood the opioid receptors in their brain, essentially shutting down the parts that control breathing and consciousness. Narcan swoops in like a bouncer at a nightclub and kicks the opioids off those receptors, breaking the overdose and allowing the person to breathe again. In most cases it works within minutes. One shot, sometimes two, and the person gasps back to life, often confused, angry, and in immediate withdrawal, but alive. It's a beautiful thing when it works, but Grey Death isn't most cases, because Grey Death is a mix of multiple ultra-potent synthetic opioids. One dose of Narcan often isn't enough. It's like trying to put out a 5-alarm fire with a squirt gun. You might make a dent, but the fire is still raging. EMTs responding to Grey Death overdoses have reported needing 4, 5, 6, even 10 doses of Narcan to revive someone. And even then, the person can slip back into overdose once the Narcan wears off, requiring even more doses. It's exhausting, expensive, and terrifying. The problem is that Narcan has a shorter half-life than many synthetic opioids. It might block the receptors for 30 to 90 minutes, but carfentanil and some fentanyl analogues can linger in the system for hours. So what happens is this. You give someone Narcan, they wake up, they seem okay, and then an hour later, they're overdosing again because the opioids are still in their system and the Narcan has worn off. It's like a horrible game of tag where death keeps finding you. Despite these challenges, Narcan remains one of the most important tools in fighting the opioid epidemic. Police departments across the country now carry it. Fire departments stock it. Some states have made it available over the counter at pharmacies. Good Samaritan laws protect people who call 911 during an overdose, and Narcan distribution programs train regular people, friends, family members, even librarians, how to administer it. Because when seconds matter, you can't wait for an ambulance. You need someone right there, right now, with Narcan in hand. There are stories of parents who've revived their own children, friends who've saved friends, strangers who've saved strangers. Every one of those reversals is a second chance, an opportunity to get help, to enter treatment, to escape the cycle of addiction. But here's the brutal truth. Narcan only works if someone finds you in time. If you're alone in a bathroom, if you're in a car in a parking lot, if you're in an alley where no one walks by, Narcan can't save you. And with Grey Death, the window for intervention is so narrow that even a few minutes' delay can be the difference between life and death. Some critics argue that Narcan enables drug use, that it gives people a safety net that encourages risk-taking. That's nonsense. No one overdoses on purpose. No one thinks, I can use as much as I want because Narcan will save me. Overdoses are accidents, miscalculations, or the result of unexpectedly strong drugs. Narcan doesn't enable addiction. It prevents death. And in the fight against Grey Death, where every dose is Russian roulette. Preventing death is the bare minimum we can do. So yes, Narcan is a miracle drug. But miracles only work if you're there to perform them. And against something as powerful as grey death, sometimes even miracles aren't enough. In the past, when paramedics responded to an overdose, they'd show up, assess the situation, administer Narcan and transport the patient. Standard procedure. But grey death changed the game. Suddenly, first responders were treating overdose scenes like chemical spills. They started wearing gloves, multiple pairs. They wore masks. In some cases, they donned full hazmat suits, because even being in the same room as grey death could be dangerous. Think about that for a second. Paramedics, people who've seen everything from car crashes to gunshot wounds to heart attacks, now need hazmat suits to respond to drug overdoses. It's not because they're being overly cautious. It's because the drugs have become so potent that the very air around an overdose victim can be contaminated with aerosolized particles. If someone is smoking fentanyl or grey death, the smoke lingers. If powder gets disturbed, it can become airborne. Breathe it in and you're the next victim. This started happening around 2016 and 2017 when reports came out of Ohio, New Hampshire and other states hit hard by the opioid crisis. Paramedics and police officers were showing up to overdose scenes and collapsing themselves, not because they used drugs, but because they were exposed to fentanyl just by being in the room. One officer in Connecticut opened a bag containing suspected fentanyl and immediately felt dizzy and short of breath. He was rushed to the hospital and barely survived. The fentanyl hadn't even touched his skin. He'd just breathed near it. Fire departments and EMS agencies had to completely revise their protocols. Now, when a call comes in for a suspected overdose, especially one involving synthetic opioids, responders suit up before they even enter the scene. Gloves, masks, sometimes full protective gear. They treat the environment as hazardous, because it is. They avoid touching surfaces. They don't move the victim until they've assessed the area for drug residue. And they carry Narcan not just for the victim, but for themselves, in case they get accidentally exposed. But here's the problem. All of this takes time. And in an overdose, time is the one thing you don't have. Every second matters. Every minute someone isn't breathing, their brain is dying. So there's this horrible calculus that responders have to do. Move fast and risk exposure, or protect themselves and potentially arrive too late to save the victim. It's an impossible choice, and it's one they have to make multiple times a day in cities ravaged by the opioid epidemic. The emotional toll on first responders is staggering. Imagine showing up to the same house 3 times in 1 month to revive the same person. Imagine seeing teenagers, young parents, grandparents, all overdosing on the same drug. Imagine knowing that the next call could be your own overdose because you breathed the wrong air or touched the wrong surface. Paramedics are quitting. Police officers are retiring early. The trauma, the exposure risk, the sheer relentlessness of it, it's too much. And yet, they keep showing up. They keep suiting up, carrying Narcan, entering contaminated scenes, and pulling people back from the brink of death. Because that's the job. Because someone has to. But the fact that we've reached a point where saving someone's life from a drug overdose requires the same protective gear as cleaning up a chemical spill should tell you everything you need to know about how out of control this crisis has become. Grey death didn't just kill users, it turned first responders into potential casualties. And that's a level of danger we've never seen before in the history of drug epidemics. Let's get scientific for a moment, because understanding how grey death kills you makes it even more terrifying. Opioids work by binding to receptors in your brain, spinal cord, and other parts of your body. When they attach to these receptors, they block pain signals and release a flood of dopamine, creating that euphoric high users chase. But here's the problem. Those same receptors also control your breathing. Your body breathes automatically. You don't think about it. You don't consciously tell your lungs to expand and contract. Your brainstem handles that, specifically the medulla oblongata, which monitors carbon dioxide levels in your blood and tells your lungs to breathe accordingly. Opioid receptors sit right there in that system. Under normal circumstances, they help regulate pain and reward. When you flood them with synthetic opioids like fentanyl, carfentanil, or the cocktail of death that is grey death, they shut down. The signal to breathe gets weaker and weaker until it stops completely. This is called respiratory depression, and it's the #1 killer in opioid overdoses. So here's what happens when you use grey death. The drugs hit your bloodstream, race to your brain, and slam into those opioid receptors like a freight train. Within seconds you feel the high, euphoria, warmth, a sense of everything being okay. But simultaneously, your breathing slows, your breaths become shallow, your oxygen levels drop. Your body, sensing danger, tries to compensate, but the drugs are too strong. Your brainstem, overwhelmed, stops sending the signal to breathe. Your lungs stop moving. Your heart, starved of oxygen, begins to slow, and your brain, the most oxygen-hungry organ in your body, starts dying. Brain death doesn't happen instantly. It takes about 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen for irreversible brain damage to begin. That's your window. 4 to 6 minutes to be found, to receive Narcan, to start breathing again. If someone finds you at minute 2, you'll probably be okay. Minute 5? You might survive, but with brain damage. Minute 7? You're likely already gone, or you'll be on life support while your family makes the decision to pull the plug. And here's the truly horrifying part. You don't know you're dying. The high from opioids suppresses your panic response. You don't gasp for air, you don't claw at your throat, you just drift away, calmly, quietly, unaware that your body is shutting down. It's a peaceful death, which is why people call opioids a soft way to go, but make no mistake, you're still dead. Grey death accelerates this entire process. Because it's a mixture of multiple ultra-potent opioids, the respiratory depression happens faster and more severely than with heroin alone. Your body doesn't have time to adjust or compensate. One moment you're conscious, the next you're not. And because the potency varies wildly from batch to batch, you have no way of knowing whether the dose you're taking is manageable or lethal. It's biochemical Russian roulette. Meanwhile, other systems start failing too. Your heart rate drops, a condition called bradycardia. Your blood pressure plummets, your body temperature falls. If you're unconscious and lying in one position, your muscles can start breaking down, releasing proteins into your bloodstream that damage your kidneys, a condition called rhabdomyolysis. If you survive the initial overdose but don't get to a hospital quickly, you can die hours or days later from organ failure. And even if Narcan brings you back, even if you survive, there's no guarantee you'll be the same. Prolonged oxygen deprivation can cause permanent brain damage, memory loss, cognitive impairment, personality changes. You might wake up, but you might wake up as someone different, someone broken. That's the chemistry of death. It's not dramatic, it's not cinematic. It's just your body quietly shutting down while your brain, desperate and dying, realizes too late that something has gone horribly wrong. From a business perspective, and yes, drug dealing is a business, a horrifying, illegal one, but still a business, grey death makes no sense. Why would dealers sell a product so strong it kills their customers? Dead customers don't come back for more. They don't refer friends, they just die. And yet, grey death spread like wildfire. Why? The answer is complicated and depressing. First, let's address the obvious. Many dealers don't actually care about their customers. They're not building relationships or brands. They're moving product, making money, and staying one step ahead of the cops. If someone dies, that's unfortunate, but it's also just part of the game. The street drug economy isn't concerned with customer retention or long-term sustainability. It's about fast money, and synthetic opioids provide exactly that. Second, and this is the truly twisted part, death can actually be good for business. When someone overdoses on a particular dealer's product, word spreads fast. Did you hear? Tommy died from that grey stuff he got from Mike. And instead of scaring people away, it attracts them. Because in the upside-down logic of addiction, a product that kills someone must be really, really strong. And if you're a user whose tolerance has skyrocketed, whose regular heroin barely makes a dent anymore, you want that strong product. You think, I'll just use less, I'll be more careful, but I need to try that. It's the same reason people flock to restaurants with long lines, or buy products that celebrities endorse. Social proof. If it's popular, if it's notorious, it must be good. Except in this case, good means potent enough to stop your heart. Dealers know this. They know that an overdose death can actually boost sales. So they don't dilute their product. They don't warn people. They just keep selling, and people keep dying, and the cycle continues. Third, the economics of synthetic opioids make them irresistible to dealers. Traditional heroin requires poppy fields, farmers, refinement labs, and smuggling operations. It's expensive, risky, and involves a lot of moving parts. Synthetic opioids? You order chemicals online from China, mix them in your basement, and suddenly you have a product that's exponentially more potent than heroin and costs a fraction to produce. You can cut it into everything, stretch your supply infinitely, and make massive profits. The fact that it kills people is just an externality, something economists call a cost borne by someone other than the producer. In this case, the cost is human lives. But here's where the dilemma actually becomes real. When you kill too many customers too quickly, law enforcement notices, headlines pop up, investigations ramp up, task forces form. Suddenly, you're not just a street dealer, you're a target. Police start connecting overdose deaths to specific batches, tracing them back to suppliers, building cases, and when they catch you, you're not just facing drug distribution charges, you're facing murder charges. In some states, if your product kills someone, you can be charged with manslaughter or even murder. That's a life sentence, not a few years in county jail. So some dealers, the smarter or more paranoid ones, started avoiding grey death. They went back to regular heroin or stuck with fentanyl in smaller quantities. But plenty of others didn't care or didn't think that far ahead. They kept mixing their chemical cocktails, kept selling death in baggies, and kept counting money while bodies piled up. Because in the drug trade, like in any predatory industry, there's always someone willing to do what others won't if the profit margin is high enough. The dealer's dilemma isn't really a dilemma at all. It's just capitalism at its darkest. Maximize profit, minimize cost, externalize risk. And in the world of grey death, the cost is measured in corpses. Grey death isn't manufactured in gleaming pharmaceutical labs with quality control and safety protocols. It's cooked up in basements, garages, and makeshift labs by people who learned chemistry from YouTube and the dark web. The chemists mixing these batches aren't worried about purity or consistency. They're worried about profit, so they throw together whatever synthetic opioids they can get their hands on, mix it with fillers, and press it into pills or sell it as powder. The process is terrifyingly simple, which is part of why grey death spreads so quickly. You don't need a degree in chemistry. You don't need expensive equipment. You need a scale, some mixing bowls, maybe a pill press if you're feeling fancy, and access to Chinese chemical suppliers who'll ship you fentanyl, carfentanil, or U47700 with minimal questions asked. The chemicals arrive mislabeled as research compounds or industrial chemicals, bypass customs inspections, and land on your doorstep ready to be turned into death. Here's where it gets dangerous. These basement chemists have no idea what they're doing. Pharmaceutical companies spend millions of dollars on precision equipment to ensure every pill contains exactly the right amount of active ingredient. Street labs, they eyeball it. They dump powder into a bowl, throw in some filler, maybe lactose, maybe baby laxative, maybe literal concrete dust, and stir it with a spoon. There's no testing, no quality control, no standardization. One corner of the batch might be mostly filler with barely any fentanyl. Another corner might be pure fentanyl, enough to kill 50 people. This inconsistency is what makes grey death so deadly. When you buy a pill or a baggie, you have absolutely no idea what you're getting. It could be weak and barely get you high, or it could stop your heart in 30 seconds. It's like playing Russian roulette where someone keeps adding more bullets but won't tell you how many are in the gun. Every use is a gamble, every dose is a mystery, and the house always wins. The mixing process itself is hazardous. Remember, fentanyl can kill you through skin contact. So these basement chemists, often users themselves, are handling substances that could drop them dead with a single mistake. They're not wearing hazmat suits or respirators. They're wearing t-shirts and maybe some latex gloves if they're being careful. Reports have emerged of dealers overdosing while cutting their own product, collapsing face first into bowls of fentanyl-laced powder. It's darkly poetic, killed by the very poison they were preparing to sell. And it's not just individuals cooking this stuff up. Organised crime syndicates have gotten into the synthetic opioid game because the profit margins are absurd. The Mexican cartels, traditionally known for heroin and cocaine, have shifted heavily into fentanyl production. They import precursor chemicals from China, set up labs in Mexico, and smuggle the finished product across the border. But even cartel labs, which are more sophisticated than basement operations, struggle with consistency. They're churning out product as fast as possible, prioritizing volume over safety. The result is a flood of unpredictable, wildly varying batches of grey death hitting the streets. One week, users in Atlanta are dying from a batch that's 80% carfentanil. The next week, users in Cincinnati are overdosing on something completely different that just happens to also be grey and deadly. Law enforcement can't keep up, forensic labs can't test fast enough, and users, they're just hoping each hit isn't their last. The truly insane part is that this is all preventable. Pharmaceutical-grade opioids are safe when manufactured correctly and used as prescribed. The danger isn't the drugs themselves, it's the lack of regulation, the profit motive, and the absolute absence of accountability. Grey death isn't made badly by accident. It's made badly because no one making it cares whether you live or die. They just care whether you pay. And if you die, well, there's always another desperate addict waiting in line. Imagine buying what you think is heroin. You've used heroin before. You know your tolerance. You measure out what you think is a safe dose. You inject it, snort it, or smoke it. And then, within seconds, everything goes wrong. Your vision blurs, your chest tightens, your breathing slows. You try to call for help, but your body won't cooperate. You collapse. This is what using grey death feels like, assuming you're conscious long enough to feel anything at all. Every single time someone uses grey death, they're playing Russian roulette. They don't know what's in it. They don't know how strong it is. They don't know if this dose will get them high or kill them. And here's the kicker. They often don't even know they're using grey death. They think they're buying heroin or fentanyl. The dealer might not even know what they're selling. It's just the good stuff, passed down through layers of the supply chain, each person taking their cut and adding their own mystery filler, until what started as a relatively known product becomes an unknowable chemical cocktail. Users try to protect themselves. They test their drugs with fentanyl test strips, little paper strips that can detect fentanyl in a sample. But those strips can't detect every analogue. They can't tell you how much is in there or what else might be mixed in. So you might test your heroin, get a positive result for fentanyl and think, okay, I'll just use less. But if it's actually grey death with carfentanil in it, using less might still mean using a lethal dose. The margin for error is microscopic. Some users practice what's called safety protocols. They use with someone else present, someone who's staying sober and has Narcan ready. They do test shots, tiny amounts to see how strong the product is before committing to a full dose. They keep their phones nearby unlocked so someone can call 911 if things go bad. These are smart precautions, and they've saved lives. But they're also depressing as hell. Imagine having to treat getting high like defusing a bomb. One wrong move and you're dead. But here's the brutal reality. Addiction doesn't care about safety protocols. When you're dope sick, when your body is screaming for opioids, when you're sweating and shaking and your bones feel like they're breaking, you're not thinking clearly. You're not testing your drugs or measuring doses carefully. You're just trying to make the pain stop. And grey death preys on that desperation. It takes people at their most vulnerable and punishes them for it. There are stories of users who survived grey death overdoses and swore they'd never use again. They'd been revived with Narcan, spent a night in the hospital, went home terrified and grateful to be alive. And then, days or weeks later, they used again. Not because they wanted to die, not because they were suicidal, but because addiction is a chronic disease, and chronic diseases relapse. Their brains, rewired by years of opioid use, told them they needed the drug more than they needed safety, more than they needed family, more than they needed life itself. And then there are the ones who didn't get a second chance. The ones who used alone. The ones whose friends panicked and ran instead of calling 911 because they didn't want to get arrested. The ones who died in gas station bathrooms, in parked cars, in their childhood bedrooms with their parents asleep down the hall. They played Russian roulette and lost. And the gun was loaded by someone who didn't care whether they lived or died, as long as the money kept flowing. That's the user's reality with grey death. It's not a drug. It's a lottery where the prizes are high and the penalty is death. And every single person using it knows the odds are terrible. But addiction makes you believe you'll be the lucky one, right up until you're not. Grey death didn't appear in a vacuum. It emerged during the height of America's opioid epidemic, a crisis decades in the making. It started with prescription painkillers, OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocet. Doctors handed them out like candy for back pain, dental work, sports injuries. Millions of Americans got hooked, not because they were weak or reckless, but because they trusted their doctors and didn't realize how addictive these pills were. The story of how we got here is infuriating. In the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies launched massive marketing campaigns aimed at doctors. Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, told physicians that opioids were safe for long-term pain management and that the risk of addiction was less than 1%. That was a lie. They knew it was a lie. Internal documents later revealed that Purdue was fully aware of OxyContin's addictive potential, but they buried that information and kept pushing their pills because profits were through the roof. Doctors, who genuinely wanted to help their patients, started prescribing opioids for everything. Wisdom tooth extraction? Here's a bottle of Vicodin, sprained ankle. How about some Percocet? Chronic back pain. Let's try OxyContin. Patients took the pills as prescribed, felt relief, and kept taking them. Some got refills, some started doctor shopping, visiting multiple physicians to get more prescriptions. And when doctors finally started cutting people off, realizing too late that they'd created an addiction crisis, those patients didn't just stop needing opioids, they turned to the streets. Heroin, once considered a hard drug used by junkies in back alleys, suddenly became the answer for suburban moms, construction workers, and college students. It was cheaper than pills and easier to get. The stigma faded. Overdoses skyrocketed. And then, just when the heroin epidemic seemed like it couldn't get worse, fentanyl entered the picture. Dealers started cutting heroin with fentanyl to make it stronger and stretch their supply. Overdoses doubled, then tripled. Emergency rooms were overwhelmed. By the mid-2010s, America was in full crisis mode. The CDC reported that over 64,000 people died from drug overdoses in 2016 alone, most of them from opioids. That's more than car accidents, more than gun violence. It was a body count that rivaled war, and it was happening on American soil, in American homes to American families, and no one knew how to stop it. Grey Death emerged from this chaos like the final boss in a nightmare video game. It was the logical conclusion of every bad decision, every corporate lie, every failed policy. We'd created a population of millions addicted to opioids, built a black market eager to supply them, and allowed synthetic opioids to flood into the country unchecked. Grey Death was the perfect storm. Maximum potency, minimum cost, and an endless supply of desperate users with tolerances so high that regular heroin no longer worked. And the storm is still raging. Even now, years after Grey Death first made headlines, people are still dying. New synthetic opioids are still being developed. The supply chain from China to America is still operating, and the fundamental problems, addiction, despair, lack of access to treatment, remain unsolved. Grey Death wasn't the beginning of the opioid epidemic, but it might not be the end either. It might just be another chapter in a tragedy that keeps getting darker. Back in the day, and by the day, I mean the early 2000s, heroin was the ultimate street opioid. It was strong, it was cheap, and it got you high. But as tolerance builds, users need more and more to feel the same effect. A dose that once sent you to the clouds now barely takes the edge off. So users started chasing stronger products. Enter fentanyl, then carfentanil, then Grey Death. Tolerance is one of the cruelest aspects of opioid addiction. Your brain adapts to the constant presence of opioids by downregulating receptors and changing how it responds to the drug. What this means in practice is that the high you got the first time you used, you'll never feel that again. You can chase it, you can increase your dose, you can switch to stronger drugs, but you'll never recreate that initial euphoria. It's like trying to recapture your first kiss or the first time you heard your favourite song. The magic is gone, but your brain keeps demanding more. So users escalate. They start with pills, move to heroin, then start mixing heroin with other drugs to boost the effect. Some add cocaine to create a speedball. Others add benzodiazepines like Xanax to intensify the sedation. And when even those combinations stop working, they seek out stronger opioids. That's where fentanyl came in. It was 50 times stronger than heroin, which meant you could use less and get higher. Perfect, right? Except it also meant you could die 50 times easier. But even fentanyl stopped being enough for some users. Their tolerance climbed so high that doses that would kill a normal person barely kept them well. Well, in this context means not dope sick, not high, just functional enough to not be vomiting and shaking. Addiction stops being about pleasure and becomes about avoiding pain. You're not using to feel good, you're using to not feel awful. And when fentanyl can't do that anymore, you need something stronger. That's the demographic Grey Death targeted. Experienced users with massive tolerances who'd tried everything else and were still suffering. They heard about this new grey powder that was stronger than anything on the streets, and they thought, finally, something that might actually work. They didn't want to die, they just wanted relief. But Grey Death doesn't distinguish between relief and death. The line is so thin it might as well not exist. And here's the really tragic part. Even if these users wanted to quit, Even if they were desperate to get clean, withdrawal from high-dose opioids is brutal. It's not just uncomfortable, it's agony. Imagine the worst flu you've ever had. Multiply it by 10 and stretch it out for weeks. Your bones ache, your muscles spasm, you sweat and freeze simultaneously. You vomit. You can't sleep. You can't eat. Every second feels like an hour. And your brain, screaming for opioids, tells you that one more hit will make it all stop. Just one more. And you believe it because the alternative is enduring that torture while knowing that relief is just a phone call or a drive away. So they use again, and maybe they survive, and maybe they don't. Because when normal heroin isn't enough anymore, when your tolerance is so high that you need something exponentially stronger just to feel okay, you've entered a territory where every dose is potentially lethal. Grey death became the answer to a question born of desperation. What's strong enough to satisfy someone whose body has adapted to massive amounts of opioids? The answer is a drug so strong it routinely kills people. And that's not a bug. From the user's perspective, it's a feature. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Most of the synthetic opioids flooding American streets don't come from Mexican cartels or Colombian drug lords. They come from China. Chinese chemical companies manufacture fentanyl, carfentanil, and other synthetic opioids in industrial quantities, often legally, because many of these chemicals aren't banned in China. They're then shipped to the United States, Canada, and Europe, either directly to dealers or through intermediaries. This pipeline operates in plain sight. You can go online right now, not even the dark web, just regular Google, and find Chinese chemical companies advertising fentanyl analogues for sale. They list them as research chemicals or industrial compounds with a winking disclaimer not for human consumption. It's the legal equivalent of selling bongs labelled for tobacco use only. Everyone knows what they're really for, but the technicality provides just enough cover to operate. The Chinese government has made some efforts to crack down. In 2019, they banned all fentanyl analogues, closing a loophole that had allowed chemists to create slight molecular variations that technically weren't illegal. But enforcement is inconsistent. China is a massive country with thousands of chemical manufacturers. Policing every factory and lab is nearly impossible. And even when authorities shut down one operation, 3 more pop up in different provinces under different names. The economics make it irresistible. Producing fentanyl in China costs pennies per dose. You can manufacture a kilogram of pure fentanyl for around $3,000 to $5,000. That same kilogram, once cut and distributed in the United States, can be worth up to $1.5 million on the street. That's a profit margin of roughly 30,000%. No other industry on Earth comes close. Not tech, not oil, not pharmaceuticals, just death. Shipping is shockingly easy. Chinese suppliers pack the fentanyl into innocent-looking packages, stuffed animals, machine parts, DVD cases, and mail them via regular postal services or private carriers like FedEx and DHL. Customs agents try to catch these shipments, but the volume is overwhelming. The US Postal Service alone processes over 600 million international packages every year. Even with advanced scanning technology and drug-sniffing dogs, the vast majority slip through undetected. And if a package does get seized, the supplier just ships another one. The loss is negligible. Some shipments go directly to street-level dealers in the US, who ordered small amounts for personal use or to cut into their heroin supply. Others go to Mexican cartels who've become major customers of Chinese chemical suppliers. The cartels import precursor chemicals or finished fentanyl, set up their own labs, and produce massive quantities that they then smuggle across the southern border into the United States. It's a global supply chain as sophisticated as any legitimate multinational corporation, except the product kills people. The Chinese connection isn't just about manufacturing either. Chinese money launderers help drug organizations move their profits. Chinese organized crime groups known as triads have partnerships with Mexican cartels and American gangs. It's a web of international crime that spans 3 continents, and law enforcement is hopelessly outmatched. The DEA can bust a dealer in Ohio, but that doesn't stop the factory in Wuhan from shipping another batch next week. And here's the geopolitical nightmare. Fentanyl has become a weapon. Some experts believe that China allows this trade to continue, at least partially, because it destabilizes the United States. Every American who dies from a Chinese-manufactured opioid is a tiny victory in a shadow war. It's chemical warfare by proxy, and we're losing. Badly. Until we address the Chinese supply chain, until we pressure China to actually enforce their bans, until we develop technology to detect these shipments reliably, Grey Death and its successors will keep flowing into America, and people will keep dying. If you want to buy Grey Death, or any synthetic opioid for that matter, you don't need to know a dealer on a street corner. You just need an internet connection and access to the dark web. Websites like Silk Road before it was shut down, and its successors operate like eBay for illegal drugs. Sellers list their products, complete with customer reviews, purity ratings, and shipping options. The dark web, for those unfamiliar, is a part of the internet that isn't indexed by regular search engines like Google. You access it using special software like Tor, which anonymizes your connection and makes it nearly impossible to trace. Once you're in, you find marketplaces selling everything from counterfeit documents to weapons to drugs. Lots and lots of drugs. And the user interface is disturbingly normal. Shopping for fentanyl looks almost identical to shopping on Amazon. You browse listings, read reviews, add items to your cart, and check out using cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Silk Road was the pioneer. Launched in 2011 by a guy calling himself Dread Pirate Roberts, later identified as Ross Ulbricht, it revolutionized drug dealing. No more sketchy meetups in parking lots. No more wondering if your dealer was a cop. Just point, click, and wait for the mailman. At its peak, Silk Road had over 100,000 users and facilitated over $1 billion in sales. The FBI eventually shut it down in 2013 and arrested Ulbricht, but by then, the blueprint was out there. Dozens of successor sites popped up. Alpha Bay, Hansa, Dream Market, Empire Market. Each one promised to be more secure, more reliable, more anonymous than the last. And each one sold fentanyl, carfentanil, and eventually Grey Death. Sellers marketed their products like legitimate businesses, highest purity, fast shipping, discreet packaging. Customer reviews were brutal and honest. Product was fire, but shipping took too long. 4 stars. Straight killed my tolerance, would buy again. It's eerie how normalized it all is. Buyers loved the dark web because it offered safety, or at least the illusion of it. No risk of getting robbed or shot in a drug deal gone wrong. No face-to-face contact, just crypto payments and mail delivery. And if a package got seized by customs, you just claimed ignorance. I didn't order that. Someone must have sent it to my address as a prank. Hard to prosecute. But the dark web didn't eliminate risk. It just changed it. Now instead of worrying about violent dealers, you worried about scammers who take your Bitcoin and never send anything, or cops running honeypot operations pretending to be sellers and collecting buyer information, or vendors cutting their product with lethal amounts of fentanyl because they didn't care and you couldn't complain after you were dead. The dark web made buying drugs easier, but it didn't make them safer. Law enforcement has tried to crack down. They've infiltrated marketplaces, arrested administrators, and seized servers. But it's like playing whack-a-mole. Shut down one site, and 2 more appear within weeks. The technology favors the criminals. Encryption, cryptocurrency, decentralized servers, all of it makes tracking and prosecution incredibly difficult. and as long as there's demand, there will be supply. The really disturbing thing is how accessible it all is. You don't need to be a hacker or tech genius to access the dark web. There are YouTube tutorials, Reddit forums, step-by-step guides. Teenagers in their bedrooms can order fentanyl as easily as they can order sneakers, and many do. Overdose deaths among young people have spiked, partially because of how easy the dark web has made it to obtain synthetic opioids. Grey Death found a perfect distribution channel in the dark web. Anonymous sellers could offer it without fear of immediate arrest. Buyers could purchase it without exposing themselves to street-level dangers, and the whole system operated in the shadows, invisible to parents, teachers and law enforcement, until someone ended up in the morgue. The dark web didn't create the opioid epidemic, but it accelerated it, democratized it, and made death deliverable by mail. In 2017, an Ohio police officer named Chris Green was searching a car during a drug bust when he accidentally brushed against some white powder. He didn't think much of it until minutes later, when his vision started tunneling, his breathing slowed and he collapsed. His fellow officers rushed to administer Narcan. It took 4 doses to revive him. 4. The powder? Fentanyl, a close cousin of Grey Death. Chris Green's story went viral because it shattered the illusion that you had to be a drug user to be a victim of the opioid crisis. Here was a cop, a person whose job is to protect others, nearly dying from simply touching drugs during a routine search. The video of him collapsing, his colleagues desperately trying to revive him, was terrifying. It showed just how weaponized these substances had become. You didn't have to inject them, snort them, or smoke them. Just being near them, just touching them for a split second, could kill you. And Chris Green wasn't alone. Reports started flooding in from across the country. A Connecticut officer opened a bag of suspected fentanyl and immediately felt dizzy. A New Jersey cop swept powder off a car seat and went into respiratory distress. A Pennsylvania state trooper inhaled particles during a traffic stop and needed emergency medical treatment. These weren't isolated incidents. They were warnings. The drugs on the streets had become so potent that first responders were now in the line of fire. Police departments scrambled to respond. They issued new protocols. Don't touch suspected drugs without gloves, preferably multiple pairs. Don't open bags or containers unless absolutely necessary. If you suspect fentanyl or synthetic opioids, treat the scene like a hazmat situation. Call for backup, call for medics, and carry Narcan, not just for suspects and civilians, but for yourself and your fellow officers. Training sessions focused on recognizing the signs of exposure. If you feel dizzy, nauseous, short of breath, or lightheaded after touching or being near suspected drugs, tell someone immediately. Don't try to tough it out. Don't assume it's just stress or adrenaline. Assume you've been poisoned and get Narcan into your system as fast as possible. Because with fentanyl and Grey Death you have minutes at most. But the psychological toll was immense. Imagine being a police officer knowing that a routine traffic stop could kill you. Not from a gun or a knife, but from invisible powder on a steering wheel or a dashboard. Every car search became a potential death trap. Every drug bust required mental preparation, not just for confrontation, but for contamination. Officers started retiring early. Recruitment dropped. Why risk your life for a paycheck when the very thing you're supposed to fight can kill you by accident? Some departments invested in field testing kits that could identify fentanyl without direct contact. Others purchased protective equipment, gloves, masks, even hazmat suits for high-risk situations. But equipment cost money, and not every department has the budget. Rural police forces, already stretched thin, struggled to keep up, so officers made do with whatever they had, knowing every shift could be their last. And then there were the families, spouses kissing their partners goodbye each morning, wondering if they'd come home. Kids asking why dad had to wear so much protective gear now. The opioid crisis didn't just victimize users, it turned everyone, paramedics, firefighters, cops, even bystanders, into potential casualties. Grey Death had changed the rules of engagement, and Chris Green's story, as terrifying as it was, served as a wake-up call. This wasn't just a drug problem anymore, it was a public health emergency where simply doing your job could get you killed. In the fight against Grey Death and synthetic opioids, one of the simplest tools is also one of the most effective fentanyl test strips. These are small, cheap paper strips that can detect the presence of fentanyl and some of its analogues in drugs. You dissolve a tiny bit of your substance in water, dip the strip, and within minutes it tells you whether fentanyl is present. The technology isn't new or complicated. Fentanyl test strips work on the same principle as pregnancy tests. They detect specific molecules through a chemical reaction. When fentanyl is present, a line appears on the strip. No line, fentanyl detected. It's simple, it's fast, and it costs about $1 per strip. In terms of harm reduction, it's one of the best investments you can make. A single strip can prevent an overdose. A single strip can save a life. But here's where America's war on drugs shows its true colours. For years, fentanyl test strips were classified as drug paraphernalia in many states. That meant distributing them was illegal. Harm reduction organisations that wanted to hand them out for free could be prosecuted. Needle exchanges that tried to include them in their kits risked losing funding or being shut down entirely. The logic was twisted. We'll arrest you for trying to help people not die, because helping people not die might be seen as enabling drug use. Let's pause and appreciate the absurdity. Narcan, which reverses overdoses, is legal and widely distributed, but fentanyl test strips, which help prevent overdoses in the first place, were illegal. It's like saying, we'll give you a fire extinguisher, but we'll arrest you if you try to install a smoke detector. The policy wasn't based on science or public health. It was based on ideology, on the belief that any tool that makes drug use safer encourages people to keep using. Never mind that people were going to use anyway, and that knowledge about what's in your drugs can mean the difference between life and death. Fortunately, attitudes have started to shift. As overdose deaths skyrocketed, as synthetic opioids became ubiquitous, as even the most hardline anti-drug advocates had to confront the reality that people were dying preventable deaths, states began legalizing fentanyl test strips. By 2021, dozens of states had either decriminalized them or explicitly legalized their distribution. Harm reduction organizations celebrated and immediately started handing them out by the thousands. But test strips aren't perfect. They can detect fentanyl, but they can't always detect every analog. New synthetic opioids are constantly being developed, each with a slightly different chemical structure. A test strip might miss carfentanil or newer compounds like isotonitazine. It also can't tell you how much fentanyl is in your drugs. A positive result just means, yes, there's fentanyl here, not, there's enough to kill you. So even with a positive test, you're still making an educated guess about safety. And here's the harsh reality. Not everyone uses test strips, even when they're available. Addiction doesn't always allow for rational decision-making. When you're dope sick, when you're desperate, when your dealer is waiting and you just want the pain to stop, you don't always take the time to test, you just use. Harm reduction advocates understand this. That's why they don't just distribute test strips, they also educate users on safer practices. Use with someone else present. Start with a small test dose. Have Narcan ready. Keep your phone unlocked. These strategies don't eliminate risk, but they reduce it. The success stories are powerful. Users who tested their drugs, found fentanyl, and decided not to use that batch. People who discovered their heroin was actually pure fentanyl and adjusted their dose accordingly. Lives saved by a $1 piece of paper, and the knowledge it provided. But for every success story, there are countless others who didn't have access to test strips, didn't know they existed, or didn't use them, and died as a result. Fentanyl test strips are a reminder that harm reduction works. They're proof that you can help people without demanding they get clean first, that you can save lives without judgment or conditions. And in the fight against grey death, where every advantage matters, where every second counts, a simple paper strip might be the difference between waking up tomorrow or not waking up at all. Here's the heartbreaking reality. Many people who overdose on grey death or other opioids don't call for help, even when they know something is wrong. Why? Because of stigma. Because they're afraid of getting arrested. Because they don't want their families to know they're using. Because they've been told they're weak, immoral, or broken for being addicted. Stigma around addiction is one of the biggest killers in the opioid epidemic, and it operates quietly, insidiously. It's the voice in someone's head saying, if I call 911, they'll arrest me. It's the fear that your parents will find out and disown you. It's the shame that prevents you from telling your doctor you're struggling. It's the belief, drilled in by years of anti-drug propaganda and moral panic, that addicts are bad people who deserve what they get. This stigma shows up everywhere. In emergency rooms, where doctors and nurses sometimes treat overdose patients with visible contempt, reviving them with Narcan only to lecture them about wasting medical resources. In courtrooms, where judges hand down harsh sentences for possession, treating addiction as a crime rather than a disease. In families, where parents kick out their children for using, believing tough love will force them to get clean. And on social media, where every overdose death is met with comments like, one less junkie, or play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The language we use matters. When we call someone an addict or a junkie, we reduce them to their disease. We make addiction their identity rather than a condition they're struggling with. Person-first language, person with substance use disorder instead of addict might seem like political correctness, but it actually shifts how we think and talk about people. It reminds us they're human beings first, not just walking problems. Fear of arrest is a massive barrier to seeking help. Many states have Good Samaritan laws that provide legal protection to people who call 911 during an overdose. These laws typically grant immunity from prosecution for drug possession if you're calling to save someone's life. But not everyone knows these laws exist, and even when they do, there's distrust. What if the cops arrest me anyway? What if they use this as an excuse to search my house? What if I lose custody of my kids? These fears aren't irrational. They're based on decades of punitive drug policy that treated users as criminals rather than patients. The war on drugs created an environment where people would rather let their friend die than risk legal consequences. Think about that. We've built a system so hostile to drug users that they'd rather watch someone turn blue than pick up a phone. Then there's family stigma. Parents who find out their child is using drugs often respond with anger, disappointment, or rejection. How could you do this to us? We raised you better than this. You're not welcome here until you get clean. These reactions, while understandable from a place of fear and love, push people deeper into isolation. They use alone. They hide their addiction. They avoid seeking treatment because they can't bear the shame of admitting they have a problem. Employment stigma is another barrier. Many people fear that seeking addiction treatment will cost them their jobs, and they're often right. Despite laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which theoretically protects people with substance use disorders, the reality is that employers can and do fire people for drug use. Going to rehab means taking time off work. Drug tests can reveal ongoing use. And once you're labelled an addict, promotions dry up, opportunities vanish, and you're marked as unreliable. The result of all this stigma? People suffer in silence. They don't seek treatment until they've lost everything: jobs, families, homes. By the time they're ready to ask for help, they're often in crisis, homeless, desperate, and far harder to treat. And some never ask for help at all. They just keep using, hoping things will get better, until one day they use grey death instead of regular heroin and they don't wake up. We can't treat our way out of the opioid epidemic if people are too ashamed to seek treatment. We can't save lives if users won't call 911 because they're afraid of being arrested. Stigma kills, quietly and constantly. And until we change how we talk about, think about, and respond to addiction, grey death will keep claiming victims who died not just from drugs, but from shame. Let's talk about what happens during an overdose, because understanding this might save someone's life one day. When someone overdoses on opioids, whether it's grey death, fentanyl, or heroin, their body starts shutting down. First their breathing slows, then it becomes shallow, then it stops altogether. This is called respiratory depression, and it's the #1 cause of death from opioid overdoses. But before they stop breathing, there are warning signs. Their lips and fingertips might turn blue or purple, a condition called cyanosis, caused by lack of oxygen in the blood. Their skin becomes cold and clammy. Their pulse weakens. They might make gurgling or choking sounds, sometimes called the death rattle, as their airway partially obstructs. They're unresponsive. You can shake them, yell their name, rub your knuckles hard on their sternum, and they won't wake up. Here's what an overdose doesn't look like: someone peacefully sleeping. Movies and TV shows often portray overdoses as people gently drifting off, looking almost serene. That's Hollywood nonsense. Real overdoses are ugly. People collapse. They might vomit and choke on it. Their body might convulse or twitch. Their eyes might be open but unseeing, pupils pinned to tiny dots, a classic sign of opioid use. It's not peaceful. It's terrifying. If you're with someone and you suspect they're overdosing, here's what you do. First, call 911 immediately. Don't wait to see if they'll wake up on their own. Don't try to walk them around or put them in a cold shower. Those are myths that waste precious time. Call for help first. Second, administer Narcan if you have it. Narcan comes in 2 forms: a nasal spray and an injectable. The nasal spray is easier. You just stick it up their nostril and press the plunger. Follow the instructions on the package. 1 dose might not be enough, especially with grey death, so be prepared to give a second dose after 2 to 3 minutes if they don't respond. Third, put them in the recovery position. If they're unconscious but breathing, roll them onto their side with their top knee bent and their head tilted back slightly. This prevents them from choking if they vomit. If they're not breathing, start rescue breathing or CPR if you're trained. Every second without oxygen causes brain damage. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to try. Fourth, stay with them. Even after Narcan brings them back, they can slip back into overdose once the Narcan wears off, especially with long-acting opioids like grey death's carfentanil component. Don't let them leave before paramedics arrive. Don't let them refuse medical care. Their brain isn't thinking clearly, and they need hospital monitoring. Now here's what to expect when they wake up. Narcan doesn't just reverse the overdose, it throws them into immediate withdrawal. They'll feel terrible, nauseous, shaky, anxious, angry. Some people wake up swinging, disoriented and aggressive. Don't take it personally. Their body just went from flooded with opioids to 0 in seconds. That's traumatic. Stay calm, tell them what happened, and reassure them help is coming. And if you're the person who called 911, you probably saved their life. Even if they're angry, even if they never thank you, even if they use again the next day, you gave them a chance to survive. That matters. Overdoses are preventable deaths. Every person revived is an opportunity for treatment, for recovery, for change. The hardest part is recognizing that overdoses don't always happen to other people in bad places. They happen to teenagers in suburban bedrooms, to parents in minivans, to professionals in office bathrooms. Grey death doesn't discriminate. It kills across every demographic, every zip code, every walk of life. And the only way to stop it is to recognize the signs, act fast, and refuse to let stigma or fear prevent us from saving lives. Some people survive grey death overdoses. They're revived with Narcan, rushed to the hospital, and eventually recover. But many don't remember what happened. One moment they were using, the next they're waking up in an ambulance or ER with no memory of collapsing, turning blue, or nearly dying. It's like a black hole swallowed several minutes of their life. This memory gap is common with opioid overdoses. When your brain is starved of oxygen, it stops forming new memories. So even though you experienced the overdose, your body shutting down, EMTs working on you, Narcan being administered, your brain didn't record any of it. It's called anterograde amnesia, and it can be deeply unsettling. You have no memory of the most dangerous moment of your life. You have to trust what others tell you about how close you came to death. For some survivors, this memory gap is a blessing. They don't have to relive the trauma of dying. They don't carry the visceral memory of gasping for air or feeling their consciousness fade. But for others, it's disturbing. They wake up in a hospital with people telling them, "You almost died," and they think, "That doesn't feel real. I feel fine now." The disconnect between the severity of what happened and the lack of personal memory can make it hard to take the experience seriously. This is why some people who survive overdoses go right back to using. In their minds, nothing that bad happened. Sure, people are upset, and yes, they woke up in a hospital, but they don't feel like they died. They don't have that gut-level terror that should come from a near-death experience. So they rationalize, "I'll just be more careful next time. I'll use less. I'll test my drugs." And then they use again, and sometimes there is no next time. But there are survivors who do remember fragments. They remember the moment before collapse, the rush of the drug hitting, followed by a sudden wrongness, a sense of falling. Some remember voices around them, muffled and distant as if they were underwater. Others describe a sensation of floating, of being pulled away from their body, of wanting to come back but being unable to move or speak. These partial memories can be haunting. Then there are those who have full-blown near-death experiences. They describe seeing white light, feeling at peace, encountering deceased relatives. Whether these experiences are spiritual or just the brain misfiring under extreme stress is debatable, but to the person experiencing them, they're profoundly real. Some say their near-death experience motivated them to get clean. Others found it beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, unsure whether they were relieved to be alive or disappointed they came back. The physical aftermath of surviving a grey death overdose can be severe. If you were down for too long, you might have brain damage, memory problems, difficulty concentrating, personality changes. If you are lying in one position, you might have rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdown that damages your kidneys. Some survivors need dialysis. Some are left with permanent disabilities. And even those who recover fully carry the psychological weight. I almost died. I could have died. Next time, I might die. Family members of survivors often struggle too. They're relieved their loved one survived, but also traumatized by what they witnessed. Watching someone you love turn blue, stop breathing, and be revived with Narcan is something you never forget. Parents describe nightmares, hypervigilance, inability to sleep because they're constantly checking to make sure their child is still breathing. Siblings report PTSD symptoms. Partners live in constant fear of finding their loved one dead. And yet, despite the trauma, despite the close call, many survivors use again. Not because they're stupid or reckless, but because addiction is a chronic disease. The same brain chemistry that made them use in the first place is still there. The cravings don't disappear just because you almost died. If anything, the stress and trauma of the overdose can make them worse, so they use to cope. And the cycle continues. The survivors who do get clean often point to their overdose as a turning point, not the event itself, but what came after. Treatment, support, a reason to stay alive. But getting clean after a near-death experience isn't automatic. It requires resources, access to treatment, a support system, and a little bit of luck. For those who don't have those things, surviving a grey death overdose is just a temporary reprieve, a pause in a story that's still heading toward the same tragic ending. One of the most insidious things about grey death is that it's nearly impossible to identify on sight. It doesn't have a distinct smell like marijuana or a recognizable appearance like crack cocaine. It looks like dirty cement powder, greyish chunks, or even rock salt. You could walk past it on the street and never know it's there. You could touch it by accident and never realise you've just poisoned yourself until it's too late. This lack of identifiability creates unique danger. Law enforcement can't look at a substance and know it's grey death. Field test kits can detect fentanyl, but they can't tell you the exact composition or strength. You need a full lab analysis with gas chromatography mass spectrometry to break down exactly what's in a sample. That takes days or weeks. By then, people have already used it. People have already died. For users, the undetectability is a nightmare. You buy what you think is heroin. It's grey. Okay, so what? Heroin comes in different colours depending on where it's from and how it's processed. Brown powder, white powder, black tar. Colour isn't a reliable indicator of content. You trust your dealer, or you're desperate enough not to care. You measure out what you think is a safe dose based on your experience with heroin. You use it. And then you're dying because what you thought was heroin was actually a grey death mixture 50 times more potent. First responders face the same problem. They arrive at an overdose scene. There's powder, there's paraphernalia, there's an unconscious or dead person. Is it heroin? Fentanyl? Grey death? They don't know. They have to treat every scene as if it contains the most dangerous possible substance, which means protective equipment, caution, and time. Time that an overdose victim might not have. Even drug-sniffing dogs can't reliably detect synthetic opioids. Dogs are trained to alert to specific scents: marijuana, cocaine, heroin. But fentanyl and its analogues often don't have a strong odour, especially in small quantities. And the concentrations needed to be lethal are so tiny, micrograms, amounts invisible to the naked eye, that a dog might walk right past a lethal dose without alerting. This undetectability also means that grey death can hide in plain sight. It can be mixed into counterfeit pills pressed to look like Xanax or OxyContin. It can be disguised as cocaine or methamphetamine. Users who think they're buying one drug end up with something completely different and die because they dosed it wrong. There have been cases of people who don't even use opioids, cocaine users, meth users, overdosing on fentanyl because their drug was cut with it without their knowledge. The lack of regulation in the illicit drug market means there's no quality control, no labelling, no consumer protection. When you buy medication from a pharmacy, you know exactly what's in it, because the FDA regulates it. When you buy drugs on the street, you're flying blind. You're trusting people who have zero accountability and every incentive to cut corners, maximize profits, and not care about consequences. Technology is trying to catch up. There are handheld spectrometers that can analyze substances in the field and provide instant results, but they're expensive, thousands of dollars per unit, and not every police department or paramedic service can afford them. There are also apps and devices that claim to identify drugs, but their accuracy varies, and they're not foolproof. Until we have cheap, reliable, instant field testing that can identify not just the presence of fentanyl, but the exact composition and concentration of a sample, grey death will remain virtually undetectable, and that undetectability makes it one of the most dangerous substances on the streets. It's a poison that looks like dust, feels like nothing, and kills without warning. An invisible killer hiding in plain sight. When someone dies from grey death, who's responsible? The dealer who sold it? The person who mixed it? The guy who shipped the chemicals from China? The friend who shared it? The legal system is still figuring this out, and it's a mess. In some states, dealers can be charged with murder if their product kills someone. In others, they face lesser charges or none at all. The legal questions are complex. To prove a drug-induced homicide, prosecutors need to establish a clear chain. This person sold this specific substance to that victim victim used it, and it directly caused their death. Sounds straightforward, but in practice, it's incredibly difficult. Users often buy from multiple dealers. They share drugs with friends. They mix substances. Toxicology reports might show a cocktail of drugs in the victim system. Which one killed them? Was it the grey death, or was it the grey death combined with alcohol and benzodiazepines? Legal causation becomes murky. Then there's the question of intent. For a murder charge, you typically need to prove the defendant intended to kill someone. But most dealers aren't trying to kill their customers. They're trying to make money. They might be reckless, they might not care about safety, but premeditated murder. That's a hard sell to a jury. So prosecutors often charge drug-induced homicide instead, which is a separate statute that doesn't require proving intent, just that you deliver drugs that cause someone's death. But even that can be problematic. Defense attorneys argue that addiction, not the dealer, caused the death. They point out that the victim chose to use drugs, chose to take the risk, and therefore bears responsibility for their own death. It's a victim-blaming tactic, and it's often effective. Juries, especially in conservative areas, can be unsympathetic to people who use drugs. They see the overdose as a consequence of poor choices, not as a murder. There's also the issue of prosecutorial discretion. Some prosecutors aggressively pursue drug-induced homicide charges, treating every overdose death as a crime scene and building cases against dealers. Others are more lenient, focusing on high-level traffickers rather than street-level dealers, many of whom are themselves users selling to support their own habits. The result is wildly inconsistent enforcement. In one county, you might face life in prison for selling drugs that kill someone. In the next county over, you might get probation. And what about the manufacturers? The Chinese chemical companies producing fentanyl and carfentanil in bulk and shipping it worldwide. Can they be prosecuted? In theory, yes. In practice, almost never. China is a sovereign nation with its own legal system. American prosecutors have no jurisdiction there. The US government can pressure China to crack down, can sanction companies, can seize assets, but they can't arrest foreign nationals on foreign soil. So the source of grey death remains largely untouchable. Then there are Good Samaritan laws to consider. These laws protect people who call 911 during an overdose from being prosecuted for drug possession. They're designed to encourage people to seek help without fear of arrest. But they create a weird legal situation. If you're with someone when they overdose and you call for help, you're protected. But if you're the one who sold them the drugs, you could still be charged with homicide. So there's an incentive to not be the dealer, but there's also an incentive for dealers to never stick around after a sale in case something goes wrong. Some states have tried creative approaches. Pennsylvania, for example, has a naloxone plus law that encourages dealers to carry Narcan and call for help if a customer overdoses. The logic is that if we can't stop people from dealing, at least we can incentivize them to keep their customers alive. It's controversial. Critics say it's soft on crime, but supporters argue it saves lives, and ultimately that should be the priority. The legal nightmare extends to sentencing too. If you're convicted of drug-induced homicide, you might face decades in prison. But mandatory minimums and sentencing guidelines don't always account for context. A low-level dealer, themselves an addict, selling to support their habit, can receive the same sentence as a high-level trafficker moving kilos of grey death. Justice, in theory, should be proportional. In practice, it's often arbitrary and harsh. Until we develop a coherent legal framework for prosecuting synthetic opioid deaths, one that balances accountability with compassion, the legal system will continue to flail, and grey death will keep killing while we argue about who to blame. Even if someone survives a grey death overdose and wants help, getting into treatment is shockingly difficult. Addiction treatment centres are overwhelmed. Waitlists stretch for weeks or months. Insurance doesn't always cover the care, and many facilities still use outdated, ineffective methods based on shame and willpower rather than evidence-based medicine. Let's start with availability. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, only about 10% of people with substance use disorders receive treatment in any given year. That's not because 90% don't want help. It's because the system can't accommodate them. There simply aren't enough treatment beds. Facilities are full. Programs have waiting lists. And when someone is ready to get clean, when they've hit that moment of clarity and desperation, waiting 3 months for an intake appointment is a death sentence. Addiction is a disease of right now. The window of motivation can be incredibly small. Someone survives an overdose, and in the hospital bed they're ready to change. They want help. But by the time a bed opens up at a treatment centre, that motivation has faded. They've been discharged, they're back in their old environment with their old triggers, and the pull of drugs is overwhelming. So they use again, and maybe this time they don't survive. Cost is another massive barrier. Inpatient rehab can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $80,000 depending on the facility, the length of stay, and the amenities. Insurance coverage varies wildly. Some plans cover 30 days of inpatient treatment, others cover nothing, and if you're uninsured, good luck. There are free or low-cost programs, but they're often underfunded, understaffed, and have months-long wait lists. Even when people do get into treatment, the quality varies dramatically. The best programs use evidence-based approaches. Medication-assisted treatment with drugs like methadone or buprenorphine, cognitive behavioral therapy, wraparound services like job training and housing assistance. But many programs, especially older or faith-based ones, still rely on outdated models. 12-step programs, abstinence-only approaches, and confrontational therapy might work for some people, but they're not effective for everyone. And when treatment fails, it's often blamed on the patient. They didn't want it badly enough, rather than on the inadequacy of the program. Then there's the issue of what happens after treatment. You spend 30 or 60 or 90 days in rehab. You're clean, you're motivated, you've learnt coping skills, and then you're discharged back into the same environment that contributed to your addiction in the first place. Same stressors, same triggers, same drug-using friends. Without ongoing support, sober living housing, outpatient therapy, employment assistance, community, relapse rates are staggering. Most people relapse within the first year after treatment, and each relapse increases the risk of overdose because your tolerance has dropped while you were clean. There's also a shortage of addiction specialists. Treating opioid use disorder requires specific training and certification. Doctors need a special waiver to prescribe buprenorphine, a medication that reduces cravings and withdrawal. Many physicians don't bother getting the waiver because it's time-consuming, and they don't want to deal with the stigma of being known as the doctor who treats addicts. So there's a shortage of providers, especially in rural areas, and patients can't access the medications that could save their lives. The treatment gap isn't just a logistical problem, it's a reflection of our priorities. We've invested billions in law enforcement, in interdiction, in arrests and prosecutions. But treatment, prevention, harm reduction, those get crumbs. We treat addiction as a moral failing rather than a medical condition, and our healthcare system reflects that bias. Until we build the infrastructure needed, More treatment beds, more providers, more funding. People will keep dying preventable deaths while waiting for help that never comes. Medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, uses drugs like methadone, buprenorphine, Suboxone, and naltrexone to help people recover from opioid addiction. These medications reduce cravings, block the effect of opioids, and give people a chance to rebuild their lives without the constant pull of withdrawal. And yet, MAT is controversial. Some people see it as trading one addiction for another. The debate is as old as the treatments themselves. Methadone, a long-acting opioid agonist, has been used since the 1960s to treat heroin addiction. It works by occupying opioid receptors in the brain, preventing withdrawal symptoms and cravings without producing a high when taken as prescribed. Patients visit methadone clinics daily to receive their dose under supervision. For many, it's life-changing. They can hold jobs, maintain relationships, and function normally without constantly chasing their next fix. But critics argue that methadone is just substituting one opioid for another. They say, you're not really clean if you're on methadone. This argument fundamentally misunderstands addiction and recovery. Methadone, when properly prescribed and monitored, stabilizes brain chemistry that's been disrupted by years of opioid use. It's not getting high, it's restoring balance. It's like saying a diabetic isn't really healthy because they need insulin. The medication is treating a chronic disease, not enabling addiction. Buprenorphine, marketed as Suboxone, is a partial opioid agonist, meaning it activates opioid receptors but only partially, creating a ceiling effect. You can't get high from it, and it blocks other opioids from working if you try to use. It's safer than methadone, lower overdose risk, and can be prescribed by certified doctors in office settings rather than requiring daily clinic visits. For many people, Suboxone is the golden ticket. It eliminates cravings and withdrawal without the stigma and inconvenience of methadone clinics. But access to Suboxone is limited. Doctors need a special DEA waiver to prescribe it, and many don't bother. The training required, while not extensive, is time-consuming. And there's stigma. Physicians worry about being seen as pill mills or attracting drug-seeking patients. So even though Suboxone could help millions, only a fraction of people who need it can access it. In rural areas, the nearest Suboxone provider might be hours away, if one exists at all. Naltrexone takes a different approach. Instead of activating opioid receptors, it blocks them completely. If you take naltrexone and then try to use opioids, you feel nothing. No high, no relief, nothing. It's often used after someone has completed detox and is already abstinent. The idea is to prevent relapse by removing the reward if you slip up. Naltrexone comes in a daily pill or a monthly injection, Vivitrol, and for some people it's incredibly effective. But naltrexone has limitations. You have to be completely off opioids before starting it, at least 7 to 10 days clean, or it triggers severe withdrawal. For someone deep in addiction, getting to that 7-day mark is nearly impossible without medical support. And unlike methadone or Suboxone, naltrexone doesn't reduce cravings, it just blocks the high. So people still feel the psychological pull to use, they just can't get relief from it. That can be maddening. The abstinence-only crowd hates all of these medications. They believe the only real recovery is complete sobriety. No medications, no crutches, just willpower and 12-step meetings. This ideology is deeply embedded in American addiction treatment culture, rooted in Alcoholics Anonymous principles from the 1930s. And while AA has helped countless people, its model isn't evidence-based medicine. It's peer support and spirituality, which works for some but not everyone. The reality is that MAT dramatically reduces overdose deaths. Studies show that people on methadone or Suboxone are 50 to 70% less likely to die from opioids compared to those who aren't. MAT helps people stay in treatment longer, reduces criminal activity, and improves employment and social functioning. The evidence is overwhelming, and yet the debate continues, fueled by stigma, ideology, and a fundamental misunderstanding of addiction as a brain disease rather than a moral failure. In the context of grey death, MAT is literally life-saving. When your drug supply is contaminated with substances so powerful that one miscalculation means death, getting on a medication that eliminates your need to use street opioids is the difference between life and death. MAT isn't trading one addiction for another. It's getting someone off Russian roulette and onto stable, supervised treatment. And anyone who argues otherwise is valuing ideology over human lives. Every grey death leaves behind grieving families. Parents who found their child dead in a bathroom. Siblings who wish they'd answered that last phone call. Partners who blame themselves for not noticing the signs. Children who grow up without a parent. These families don't just mourn, they carry guilt, shame, and a profound sense of helplessness. The moment a parent finds their child's body is something that never leaves them. They describe it in vivid, haunting detail. The unnatural stillness, the blue-grey skin, the realization that comes in waves. Something's wrong, they're not breathing. Oh God, they're dead. Some try CPR, some call 911 and watch helplessly as paramedics work, knowing it's already too late. Some just hold their child, rocking back and forth, unable to process that this is real, this is permanent, this is how the story ends. The guilt is overwhelming. Parents replay every conversation, every missed sign. I knew something was wrong. Why didn't I say something? I should have been home that night. I should have checked on them more often. They torture themselves with what-ifs, constructing alternate timelines where they intervened earlier, where they said the right thing, where their child is still alive. But addiction doesn't work like that. You can't love someone out of addiction. You can't watch them closely enough to prevent every relapse. But parents don't know that, or they know it intellectually but can't feel it, so they blame themselves. Siblings carry a different kind of grief. They lose a brother or sister, but they also lose their parents to grief. Families that were once functional fall apart. Marriages crumble under the weight of blame and sorrow. Surviving siblings feel invisible, their own pain overlooked as parents focus on the child they lost. Some develop survivor's guilt, especially if they also struggled with addiction, or if they and their sibling used together. Why did they die and not me? It's a question without an answer, and it eats away at them. Partners and spouses face unique challenges. If they were also users, they're dealing with their own addiction while grieving. Some get clean out of respect for the person they lost. Others spiral deeper, using to numb the pain. And there's often blame from the deceased's family. You were supposed to watch them. Why didn't you call an ambulance sooner? This is your fault. Even when that blame is unfair, it sticks. Partners carry it, internalize it, and sometimes never recover from it. Children who lose parents to overdoses are the invisible victims. They're too young to fully understand what happened. They're told, Mommy got sick or Daddy's in heaven now. But as they get older, they piece together the truth. And that truth comes with stigma. Other kids whisper. Adults look at them with pity. They grow up knowing their parent didn't die from cancer or a car accident. They died from drugs. And somehow that's different, shameful, less worthy of sympathy. These children often end up in foster care or raised by grandparents who are too old, too tired, or too grief-stricken to effectively parent again. They're at higher risk for mental health issues, addiction themselves, and continuing the cycle. The opioid epidemic isn't just killing individuals, it's traumatizing entire generations. Families also face social isolation. Friends don't know what to say, so they say nothing. There's no casserole train, no outpouring of community support like there would be for other types of death. Addiction deaths are whispered about, not openly mourned. Obituaries use euphemisms, died unexpectedly, passed suddenly at home, never mentioning overdose or addiction. This silence compounds the grief. Families feel like they have to hide how their loved one died, and that hiding becomes another layer of trauma. Support groups like GRASP, Grief Recovery After a Substance Passing, and Nar-Anon exist for families affected by addiction deaths. In these spaces, parents can talk openly without judgment. They share photos, tell stories, cry together. These groups provide what the broader community often doesn't: permission to grieve fully, honestly, and without shame. But the grief never fully goes away. It changes, softens maybe, but it remains. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone the deceased will never reach becomes a reminder. Parents outlive their children, a reversal of the natural order that feels fundamentally wrong. And they live with the knowledge that this death was preventable. If their child had gotten treatment, if the drugs hadn't been so strong, if Narcan had been administered sooner, if. The families left behind by Grey Death aren't just grieving, they're haunted. Harm reduction is a philosophy that accepts people use drugs and focuses on keeping them alive and minimizing damage rather than demanding immediate abstinence. It includes things like needle exchanges, supervised injection sites, fentanyl test strips, and Narcan distribution. And it works. Studies show that harm reduction saves lives without increasing drug use. The concept is simple, but radical. Meet people where they are. If someone isn't ready to quit using, don't abandon them. Give them tools to use more safely. Clean needles prevent HIV and hepatitis C transmission. Supervised injection sites provide a place to use under medical supervision, so if someone overdoses, staff can intervene immediately. Fentanyl test strips let people know what's in their drugs before using. Narcan distribution turns bystanders into lifesavers. Critics hate harm reduction. They call it enabling. They argue that making drug use safer removes consequences and therefore removes motivation to quit. This argument sounds logical until you remember that death is a pretty permanent consequence, and dead people can't recover. Harm reduction doesn't encourage drug use. It acknowledges the reality that people are going to use anyway, and we can either help them survive or watch them die while clutching our moral superiority. Needle exchange programs are the oldest form of harm reduction in the US, dating back to the 1980s during the HIV/AIDS crisis. Injection drug users were getting and spreading HIV at alarming rates, and public health officials realized that providing clean syringes could stop the epidemic. It worked. Cities with needle exchanges saw dramatic drops in HIV transmission among drug users. But even now, decades later, some communities refuse to implement them, citing moral objections or fears that they'll attract drug users. Never mind the evidence, never mind that people are dying. Supervised injection sites, also called safe consumption spaces, exist in Canada, Europe, and Australia, but not yet in the United States, though some cities are trying. Users bring their own drugs and use them under the watch of trained staff who can administer Narcan if needed. No one has ever died of an overdose in a supervised injection site, not one person. They also connect users with healthcare, addiction treatment, and social services. It's harm reduction at its finest. Keep people alive long enough to get help. The data is overwhelming. Vancouver's Insight, North America's first legal supervised injection site, has reversed thousands of overdoses since opening in 2003. It reduced overdose deaths in the surrounding area by 35%. It decreased public drug use and syringe litter, and it increased treatment uptake among users. All the fears that it would attract drug users, increase crime, normalize addiction, proved unfounded. But US cities proposing similar sites face fierce opposition from local politicians, police, and residents who'd rather let people die out of sight than address the problem openly. Harm reduction also includes medication-assisted treatment, which we discussed earlier, and housing-first approaches that provide stable housing to homeless people without requiring sobriety. It turns out that asking someone to get clean while they're living on the streets and dealing with daily trauma is unrealistic. Give them stable housing first, and they're much more likely to engage with treatment. Perhaps most importantly, harm reduction operates without judgment. Staff at needle exchanges don't lecture. They don't demand users quit. They just provide supplies, information, and respect. That respect, that simple act of treating drug users as human beings worthy of care, is revolutionary. For people who've been criminalized, stigmatized, and dehumanized, encountering a system that sees their humanity and wants them to survive can be transformative. Harm reduction doesn't claim to solve addiction. It's not a cure. It's a bridge, a way to keep people alive until they're ready and able to seek treatment. Because you can't recover if you're dead. And grey death has made that bridge more critical than ever. When every use is potentially lethal, when the drug supply is contaminated with substances strong enough to kill on contact, harm reduction isn't enabling, it's emergency medicine. Grey death won't be the last synthetic opioid crisis. Chemists are already developing new compounds, more potent and harder to detect. Drugs like isotonitazine and morphine are appearing on the streets, and they're even stronger than carfentanil. Some are so new they don't even have street names yet, just chemical formulas and body counts. Isotonitazine, often called iso or nitazine, is part of a family of synthetic opioids developed in the 1950s but never approved for medical use. Researchers shelved them because they were too dangerous. Decades later, underground chemists rediscovered the formulas and started producing them. Isotonitazine is estimated to be 20 to 100 times more potent than fentanyl. Let that sink in. Fentanyl, which is already 50 times stronger than heroin, now has a younger, more vicious sibling. Morphine is another nightmare. It's a synthetic opioid that was briefly sold as a research chemical before being banned in multiple countries. It's roughly 6 times stronger than morphine, which makes it weaker than fentanyl but still plenty deadly when you don't know it's in your drugs. The problem with morphine is that it doesn't show up on standard toxicology screens. Medical examiners test for fentanyl and its known analogues, but morphine flies under the radar. People are dying from it, and their deaths are being classified as unknown cause or suspected overdose without confirming the specific substance. The synthetic opioid arms race is accelerating. Every time law enforcement identifies and bans a substance, chemists tweak the molecular structure slightly, creating a new analogue that's technically legal until regulators catch up and ban it too. It's called designer drugs, and it's a game of chemical whack-a-mole that regulators are losing badly. By the time the DEA schedules a new substance as illegal, 3 more variations are already in circulation. And these new synthetics are even harder to detect. Fentanyl test strips, which were a game-changer for harm reduction, don't detect many of the newer analogues. Spectroscopy equipment used by labs takes time to identify unknown substances, and reference standards for new drugs often don't exist yet. So even when medical examiners suspect a new synthetic, they can't always confirm it. The drug stays anonymous, the body count rises, and users have no idea what they're actually using. There's also the terrifying possibility of non-opioid synthetic drugs entering the supply. Synthetic cannabinoids, spice, K2U, have already caused outbreaks of overdoses and bizarre psychiatric symptoms. Synthetic cathinones, bath salts, caused violent, erratic behaviour. What happens when some chemist decides to create a synthetic depressant or dissociative that's 1,000 times more potent than anything we've seen? We're one lab accident or malicious innovation away from something that makes grey death look tame. China's role in this future is uncertain. They've banned many synthetic opioids under international pressure, but enforcement is inconsistent, and manufacturers adapt quickly. India is also becoming a source for precursor chemicals and finished synthetics. The global supply chain is diversifying, which makes interdiction even harder. You can't just pressure one country anymore. You'd have to coordinate enforcement across dozens of nations, many of which lack resources or political will. The darkest possibility is weaponization. Synthetic opioids are functionally chemical weapons. In 2002, Russian special forces used an aerosolized fentanyl derivative to end a theater hostage crisis in Moscow. They pumped it through the ventilation system to incapacitate the terrorists. It worked, but it also killed 129 hostages because the dose was too strong. If state actors can use synthetic opioids as weapons, what's stopping terrorists? What's stopping someone from contaminating a public water supply or dispersing powder in a crowded space? The potential for mass casualties is horrifying. On the streets, the future looks grim. As long as there's demand for opioids, as long as addiction continues, as long as treatment is inaccessible and stigma prevents people from seeking help, chemists will keep producing new substances. Grey death will be replaced by something worse, which will be replaced by something even worse after that. We're in an opioid evolutionary spiral, and evolution favours the strongest. In this case, strongest means most deadly. The only way to break this cycle is to address the root causes, pain, both physical and psychological, that drives people to seek opioids in the first place. Poverty, trauma, despair, lack of purpose. These are the fertile ground where addiction grows. Until we address those, we're just playing defense against an enemy that keeps evolving. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your clean bed, in your safe home, maybe take a moment to feel grateful. Grateful that you don't have to wonder if the pills in your medicine cabinet are actually what the label says they are. Grateful that you can trust your doctor, your pharmacist, the systems designed to keep you safe. Grateful that you've never had to make the choice between enduring unbearable pain, physical or emotional, and risking your life on a substance that looks like sidewalk dust and kills faster than you can call for help. Grey death isn't just a drug. It's a symbol of how far we've fallen, how broken our systems have become, and how little we've valued the lives of people struggling with addiction. It's the end result of pharmaceutical companies lying about opioid safety, of doctors over-prescribing, of a healthcare system that treats pain but not the people in it, of a society that criminalizes addiction instead of treating it as the chronic disease it is. It's what happens when profit matters more than people, when stigma silences cries for help, and when desperation meets a chemical cocktail designed in a basement by someone who doesn't know your name and wouldn't care if they did. The people who died from grey death weren't statistics. They were someone's child, someone's parent, someone's best friend. They had dreams once, before addiction consumed them. They had favourite songs, inside jokes, memories of birthday parties and summer vacations. They didn't wake up one day and decide to become addicts. They were prescribed pills after surgery, or they self-medicated trauma, or they experimented once and their brain chemistry betrayed them. And then they were trapped, caught in a cycle they couldn't escape, chasing relief from withdrawal that felt like dying, using drugs that actually were. Some of them tried to get clean. They went to treatment centres with waiting lists 3 months long. They were turned away because they didn't have insurance. They relapsed because withdrawal was unbearable and they had no support system. They survived 1 overdose, 2, 3, revived each time with Narcan by strangers or friends or terrified family members, only to use again because addiction rewired their brains to prioritize the drug above everything, above safety, above family, above their own survival instinct. And some of them didn't even know they were playing Russian roulette. They thought they were buying heroin, the same heroin they'd used 100 times before. They measured out what they thought was a safe dose. They didn't know their dealer's supplier had cut it with fentanyl. They didn't know that the grey powder wasn't heroin at all, but a cocktail of synthetic opioids strong enough to kill an elephant. They didn't know because nobody told them, because there's no quality control in illegal drug markets, because we've decided as a society that people who use drugs don't deserve protection or information or compassion. But here's what we should remember. Grey death is preventable. Every single death from it was preventable. If we funded treatment instead of incarceration, if we embraced harm reduction instead of judgment, if we address the pain and trauma and despair that drives people to use in the first place, if we held pharmaceutical companies accountable, if we pressured China to actually enforce their bans on synthetic opioid manufacturing, if we treated addiction as a medical condition instead of a moral failure, people would still be alive. The first responders who suit up in hazmat gear to respond to overdose calls, who be accidentally exposed themselves, who've revived the same person 5 times and know the 6th time might be the last, they're heroes operating in an impossible situation. The harm reduction workers handing out clean needles and fentanyl test strips and Narcan, fighting stigma and sometimes their own local governments just to keep people alive. They're doing the work that society refuses to fund properly. The families who've lost someone, who found their child cold and blue, who'll never stop wondering if they could have done something different. They're survivors of a war we're not willing to acknowledge we're fighting. And the people still using, still trapped in addiction, still rolling the dice every time they use because their brain tells them they have no choice. They're not lost causes. They're not beyond saving. They're human beings in the grip of a disease, and they deserve compassion, treatment, and a chance at recovery. Every person who survives an overdose is an opportunity. Every person who gets into treatment and stays clean is a victory. Every family that gets their loved one back is a reminder that recovery is possible, that people can and do get better, that addiction doesn't have to be a death sentence. Grey death exposed something we've tried to ignore, that our systems are failing, that stigma kills, that we've valued punishment over healing for so long that we've created conditions where touching the wrong powder can stop your heart in seconds. It's horrifying, it's preventable, and it's still happening right now as you listen to this, as you close your eyes and drift towards sleep. So maybe tomorrow, think about what you can do. Support harm reduction programs in your community. Advocate for treatment funding. Challenge stigma when you hear it. Carry Narcan. It's available at most pharmacies without a prescription, and you can learn how to use it in 5 minutes. Vote for policies that treat addiction as a health crisis, not a criminal justice issue. And if someone you love is struggling, don't wait for them to hit rock bottom. Rock bottom is death now. Offer help, offer support, and remember that addiction isn't a choice, but recovery can be if people are given the chance to make it. Tonight, the world is a little quieter. Somewhere a parent is checking on their child one more time, just to make sure they're still breathing. Somewhere, a person in recovery is celebrating another day clean, another day alive. Somewhere, a paramedic is restocking their Narcan, preparing for the next call. And somewhere, someone is using for what might be the last time, not knowing if they'll wake up, not knowing if this is the batch that kills them. Grey death is still out there, still grey, still deadly, still waiting in baggies and pills and powder, looking like nothing, promising relief, delivering oblivion. But knowledge is power, compassion is revolutionary, and every life saved is a testament to human resilience, to the stubborn refusal to give up on each other, even when the odds seem impossible. So sleep well tonight, and wake up tomorrow ready to be part of the solution, because this crisis won't end on its own. It will end when we decide that every life matters, that people struggling with addiction deserve help instead of handcuffs, and that a society's greatness is measured not by how it treats its most privileged members, but by how fiercely it fights to save its most vulnerable. Because history may judge us harshly for how long we let this continue, but it will also remember those who refused to look away, who fought for change, who saved lives one Narcan dose at a time, and maybe, just maybe, future generations will look back and wonder how we ever let something called grey death exist in the first place. Good night, stay safe, and remember, you never know whose life you might save just by caring enough to try.